Hi, I'm Marie from wisdompreserved.life.
And I'm Paige, Marie's daughter. We are making these adorable recycled feed bags.
These are so great because we have animals, so we go through animal feed all the time. We end up with these bags. In the past, I've used them for garbage bags out in the barn, all kinds of different things that way, but then they just go in the garbage. Now, recently, a new law has been passed in Washington that you have to have either your own shopping bags with you or pay for shopping bags.
And we don't want to pay extra money for shopping bags.
No.
So we have made several of these bags, and it also helps the environment.
Paige did this one already in advance just so that you would have a good example. And this is one that she's decided to work on today. Isn't that chicken so adorable? I really like it. So let's see what we need to do to transform this. The first thing you're going to want to do is clean off the outside of the bag. A lot of times we'll do the cleaning outside, but today we're doing it inside for you. The next step is to cut open the bottom. And I found the best way to do that would be to just cut the little strings that hold that together. And if you go in at the corner here, sometimes it's easier to get.
And be careful not to snip the actual bag.
Now that we've got both ends open, we need to turn it inside out. I find the best way is to go in from the top because the bottom's usually kind of wrinkled anyway.
It is a bit of a struggle though, so maybe
if you have a bag that's had something that has a lot of molasses in it, it tends to be way messier. And in that case, I recommend doing this on the lawn. Now that we have a clean bag, we need to cut off our ends because you can see where all the stitching marks are. And on the bottom, you'll also notice that it tends to be a very jagged edge. So we want that nice and straight. Pick a point. If it can be halfway through your bag, that's probably best. So that's kind of the side crease there and the side crease over here. And then you just match them up. And I like to pin them because this plastic likes to move. You usually only need about 3 pins. Make sure you don't put the pins right at the edge because that's where you're going to be trimming. I really like this straight edge because I can just line up this edge that we just pinned and know is good. And then I just cut off 1 inch of it. Flip it over and do the same to the bottom. At this point, you need to be aware of where you want your picture. You notice that for this bag, Nature-Wise is right at the top. You're going to have about 1 inch that folds over, so you can figure on 1 inch for the very top part. But the bottom curves under quite a bit, as well as the fact that we're going to cut the handles off of one of the parts of it. So you have to look at your picture on your bag. Now ours tends to be more up towards the top, so we're going to cut it off on the bottom to make the handles. So Paige, you need to do 2.5 inches from the bottom. And then we do 2.5 inches again. And we know for our picture that we want to take both of these handles out of the bottom. Now that we've cut out our handles, the only thing that we need to do is get rid of the doubled up portion. Usually on the back where it's glued together, it'll be doubled up and extra thick. And I really don't like having that. And so what I do is I just cut off that very bottom section. And in this case, that's going to be 3 inches that I'm cutting off, which will actually take a full 6 inches from the strip. But that's fine. It'll be a great handle. These little scraps that you cut off of those handles, you want to keep them because you need to practice with your sewing machine to make sure that your tension is appropriate. Since this is so slippery being plastic, a lot of times you have to make adjustments on that. We're going to open up our bag. What we need to do is mark our bag for where we're going to put the handles. So you want to go to the top of the bag, which for us is over here, and you want to mark out 5 inches from each corner. And now you want to turn it over and mark those same locations on the other side. This is going to be where the handles will go later. And it's just easier to put the marks in now while everything is still flat. Before we start any sewing, we need to get a nice seam in here. I don't like to do much pinning if I can help it because it just kind of saves time not to. I suppose you could pin if you wanted. But with the plastic, if you line them up really nicely and then press them with something hard I really like using the quilting triangle. Then it holds well. Another thing that you can do is just the edge of your table and rub it against it. But I guess I prefer this.
It is a lot easier if you have someone to help you, though.
That's true. It makes a difference. Now is the perfect time to test out and see if the tension is right and if the string is right. We found that if you did the tension at in between a 6 and a 7 for our machine, it worked really well to continue to pull it along nicely. But at that level, we couldn't use cotton thread. We had to switch to the polyester. So the big thing is checking the bottom of it and looks great, which is no surprise because we were just using it on another bag that was the same brand. That's the other thing. If you go from one brand of bag to another, you might have to change your tension. So now you're going to want to do a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance there on the folded edge. At this point, you don't need to do a back stitch because this is all going to be stitched over anyway.
As you can see, when I'm sewing, I like to hold the back of the strap because it makes it so that the strap doesn't slide around when you're sewing it together.
When I go on to the next one, I don't worry about doing a back stitch here either. I just continue to stitch forward and then go on to the next one. I don't even break the thread. This is particularly helpful when you're doing multiple bags at a time. So now that we have it done on the one side, you want to take your little chain of handles here and start on the cut side, again doing a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Now that we have the handles done, we can cut them apart from each other. I always trim all my ends as I go. It makes it easier when the product's done. I don't have to worry about it then. Find the end of your bag and you want to stitch the very bottom of it at 5/8 of an inch seam. You don't need to backstitch this area either because you're going to cut this portion off later. Now this next part, I think, is about the trickiest part of the whole thing. And that's because you have to open it up from this 2-dimensional shape into a 3-dimensional one. And when you do this, you want to get right into the corner and then puff it out. And puffing it out like that, but stretching out the seam to make sure that the seam is nice and flat. And you want that creased edge to be at exactly the same point as the seam. And then you pin them. And I'm going to pin them from this side. Be flipped over so you can see a little bit better. And the plastic material, it's going to try and work against you a little bit just because it's so stiff, which is great for use as a bag, but right now it's a little difficult. We're going to do the other side. Again, making sure that you stretch this out really far so that there's not any binding up in that area there. Matching up your seam line here and the crease together. And this is one of the few areas that I do pin it because I don't like it to move. And now we get to sew that bottom area, and that's what makes it so that the bag stands up and open. I found it easier just to mark the 3-inch mark on the sewing machine with some tape, and that makes it so much easier to do these corners. You measure it from where the needle is going to go down. So where the needle is going to go down to right there. Now remember, this is approximate. As long as both sides are the same, it's not too horribly important. Now we had clear tape, so I just colored the very edge of it. So you can see that is our 3-inch mark. You want to line up this little flat portion of your seam with the edge of the tape as you go ahead and stitch over this triangle. It's a little hard because the bag's really poofy. You do want to backstitch in this area because it's going to have just a little bit more pressure put on it since it's the bottom of the bag. You want that line to be very straight because that's going to be what determines the straightness of the bottom of your bag. At this point, I like to cut that off, and then I cut the corner off, probably about 1/3 of an inch from the seam line there. Remember your little marks that you made earlier, and you're going to place your handle centered on that mark. Now, whichever side it's facing up is going to be the primary side that you see. I preferred this side a little bit, so I would probably do it like that and just have the ends right on each other. Do a little back stitch. I try to do a little bit more on the handles than anything else because they get a lot of pressure. Time for us to do the other side of the handle, and you just make it nice and straight and center it again on that next little mark that you made earlier. Now that you've got your handles attached, you need to turn over the top by about 1 inch. I really like to use the quilting triangle for this because I can use it both for pressing those edges flat as well as doing the measurement. Press it over about 1 inch, and you want to try to keep it the same distance the whole way around. We're going to do approximately 3/8 of an inch seam right from that cut edge. When you're going around, you want to make sure that you bend your handle up. Bending it up makes it so that it gets caught when you do that seam. That's one reason why we use that cut edge as our guide, because the handle gets in the way of seeing how far you are over. The next step is going to be just reinforcing those handles a little bit. They're in there pretty good. I mean, they were stitched at the very top. They're stitched right here, but I wouldn't bet my groceries on them. So what we want to do is go down and back and down again, just to reinforce that top edge, and do it about 1/4 of an inch from the edge. So now that we're all done with our stitching, all we have to do is turn it right side out. When you're turning it right side out, make sure that you really press out those bottom corners. I find it easiest to press them out from the inside, and you just try to really get in that in there. You can see that she did an absolutely beautiful job with this.
Thank you.
You are welcome. And this will save us a little bit of money, saves the environment because we're not just throwing it away, we're reusing. And I just think it's such a cute thing to do with our bags. How fun, huh? So, if you've enjoyed crafting with us today, go ahead and subscribe.